On a humid Louisiana night in 1854, two enslaved sisters stepped into the grand dining hall with a silver tray. Their master and his overseer expected roasted meat and wine. What they did not expect was death itself. That night, the sisters served more than just meat. Their names, as history has lost them, we will call Sarah and Millie. Sisters, bound by blood and by bondage. They had been born on the plantation, their mother stolen from another state before them, and their father unknown. Their lives revolved around the kitchen, an endless cycle of chopping, boiling, roasting, baking. Sarah, the elder at 20, carried a quiet fire in her eyes. Millie, only 16, followed her sister's lead with a mix of innocence and desperation. Together, they worked in the shadow of the plantation's great house. They were cooks, cleaners, and servants, but they were also prisoners. The master of the plantation, Edward Harlan, was known for his cruelty. He beat men for slowing in the fields. He punished women for the smallest imagined slight. At his side was his overseer, Jonas Pike, a man whose violence surpassed even Harlan's. Where Harlan commanded, Pike executed with a whip in hand. The sisters endured insults, blows, and the daily terror of being called into dark rooms where no one could protect them. They learned early that silence was survival, that obedience kept them alive, but it did not shield them from cruelty. The year was 1854, and the atmosphere of the Louisiana plantation was suffocating. The air was thick with heat and with fear. The sound of cicadas blended with the cries from the fields. Every night, Sarah and Millie collapsed on their straw mats, their bodies aching, their souls bruised. But inside the kitchen, amid the pots and knives, a different thought began to simmer. The kitchen was both their cage and their kingdom. Sarah knew every spice, every root that could flavor a stew or poison it. Millie understood the rhythms of the house, when the master would demand food, when the overseer would take his supper. Day after day, they prepared meals for the very men who tormented them. They roasted meat to feed men who starved the enslaved. They poured wine for men who spat in their faces. They polished silver for men who chained their people. Each insult sharpened their rage. Each bruise left a mark not just on their skin, but on their memory. Sarah whispered to Millie late at night when the others slept. At first, it was only fragments. One day, they'll eat what they deserve. Millie listened with wide eyes, her heart pounding. She feared her sister's words, but she also longed for them. The thought of striking back, of turning the master's table into his grave, filled her with a dark, dangerous hope. And so the sisters began to plan. They watched the master's habits carefully. They knew which nights he feasted with his overseer, when the table was heavy with roasted meat, gravy, and bread. They knew which herbs grew in the shadows outside the kitchen, herbs whispered about by the older women, said to bring sickness if brewed too strong. Sarah collected them quietly, hiding them in the folds of her dress. Millie stood guard, pretending to fetch water when anyone came too close. For weeks, the sisters rehearsed the plan in their minds. How much to mix, how to stir it into the sauce without changing its taste, how to carry the dish with steady hands while their hearts thundered. Fear hung over them like smoke. If they were caught, the punishment would not be whipping alone. It would be death, slow, brutal, and certain. And yet the thought of continuing as they were, of serving their tormentors another meal in silence, felt worse than death itself. By the final days of summer, their decision was made. The evening was thick with heat, candles dripping wax onto polished wood. The dining hall was alive with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of forks scraping against plates. Harlan sat at the head of the table, his overseer beside him. Other guests had come and gone, but tonight it was only the two of them, gorging themselves, speaking in loud, cruel tones about the work of the fields. From the kitchen door, Sarah and Millie entered. Between them, they carried a tray heavy with roasted meat, dripping with rich gravy. The aroma filled the hall, masking the bitterness hidden within. Sarah set the dish down, her face blank, her hands steady. Millie poured wine, her gaze lowered. Neither sister allowed a flicker of emotion to betray them. "Good," Harlan muttered, slicing into the meat. Pike followed, shoveling food into his mouth with the hunger of a man who thought himself untouchable. The sisters stood at the edge of the room, waiting as they always did in case their masters demanded more. At first, nothing happened, only the sound of chewing, of wine glasses tipping back. Then, Harlan coughed. A small thing. He waved his hand, muttering about the heat. Pike laughed at him, until his own laughter turned to choking. The room shifted. The overseer clutched his throat, his face contorting. Harlan tried to stand, but the chair scraped violently as his body buckled. Plates shattered. Wine spilled across the tablecloth. Their gasps became groans. Groans became shrieks. Panic filled the hall. The master slammed his fists onto the table, knocking food to the floor, his body convulsing. Pike fell sideways, striking the ground with a thud, foam at his lips. The sisters did not move. For the first time in their lives, they watched their tormentors weaken, helpless, desperate. The men who had controlled their every breath now clawed at the floor, begging for air. And then, silence. The candles flickered in the aftermath. The plates sat half-eaten. The meat cooled on the platter. Sarah and Millie had served more than meat. They had served revenge. The chaos that followed spread like wildfire. Other enslaved workers heard the commotion, came running, and saw what had unfolded. Some gasped in horror, fearing what would come next. Others hid smiles in the shadows, knowing that justice, however brief, had been delivered. The bodies were discovered by the wider household. Accusations erupted. Whispers grew into shouts. The sisters were seized, dragged from the kitchen where they had plotted, their arms bound tight. Their fate was sealed the moment the poison touched the lips of their masters. Some say the sisters were hanged before sunrise, their bodies left as warnings to others. Some say they were beaten until nothing remained but silence. And some whisper that in the confusion, in the night's chaos, Sarah and Millie vanished into the swamps, swallowed by the land, carried toward freedom. We may never know the truth, but what is certain is this: their act was a spark, a whisper that traveled among the enslaved, a story retold in secret, in hushed voices by firelight. Proof that even in the deepest oppression, resistance could take root. In the fields, in the songs, and yes, even in the kitchens. Historians know that acts of poisoning did occur, rare but real, as enslaved men and women turned the tools of their bondage into weapons of defiance. Most of these stories were buried by time, erased from the record, silenced by fear. But the whispers survived. The sisters' defiance was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming power, however fleeting. It was about proving that even those forced into silence could make their voices heard through action. Their legacy, like so many others, lives not in official histories but in the memory of resistance. A memory passed down, hidden, waiting to be told. This was the story of two sisters who served more than meat in 1854 Louisiana. Their act of defiance echoes through the silence of forgotten kitchens, through the fire of forgotten lives. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, share this video, subscribe to our channel, and watch our playlist on hidden histories of slavery and resistance. Because remembering is resistance, and silence is complicity.